to say that the language piece is very significant. You can't ignore that. But you see that, right? You see the pictures. You got feathers. You got bird, meteor. You got pyramids. You got all that. Next slide, please. Well, no historian worth his salt is going to say that the Native Americans went over to Egypt and copied them. And no historian is going to say, well, the Egyptians actually went over and they copied the Native Americans. No, and yet we saw obvious similarities, as did my worthy opponent. So, why so similar? Every religion, based upon the culture, he argued, which is on point, every religion is going to deal with at least origin, where did we come from, morality, good and evil, meaning. Why are we the way that we are? What is the meaning of life? And destiny. What happens after death? What happens after? What's the next step? Next slide. You've heard this ridiculous statement right here. You've probably seen this little picture. All religions are the same. This is nonsense. However, there is some truth to that. Because all religions, whether ancient or modern, will agree on surface similarities and different on major differences. They're all going to have devotion to the deities, morality. They're going to have a thing of atonement. How do I please the gods? This is reasonable and rational thought to apply the same logic used by my opponent when we come to this topic here. Next slide. Now, does the Bible actually say that Jesus was the Son of God? Yes, the disciples claim that he was the Son of God. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Did the writer of the Gospels claim that Jesus was the Son of God? Yes, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Next slide. Did Jesus himself claim to be the Son of God? Yes. Do you say of him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said I am the Son of God? What about the listeners? Did they understand that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God? Yes. This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. Next slide. Jesus was claiming divinity when he said he was the Son of God, and the Jews understood this. Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself. I and the Father are one. The Jews picked up stones again to stone him. Why? Next one, it says, Jesus answered, "You have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." Now, Jesus did claim to be divine. He showed it with his works. He controlled the weather, Matthew 14. He controlled the demons and unclean spirits, Mark 5. He healed every disease, Luke 4. He raised the dead, John 12. He forgave sin, Mark 2. He knew the thoughts of men, John 21. He received worship, Matthew 2. He claimed to be able to do everything that God does, John 5:19. He said in no unclear terms he was God. Now, you saw when they picked up stones to throw at him, right? Why? It was for blasphemy. But you ask, what was the blasphemous statement? Before Abraham was, I am? Does that sound familiar? It should remind us of a bush that was burning that wasn't consumed. Remember when Moses was talking to God? God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." The Jews understood that they wanted to kill him for it. Jesus and the disciples claimed he was the Son of God. My final is the resurrection. Now, all credible scholarship affirms the four facts. Jesus was buried. There was an empty tomb. People did say that they saw him after he was dead. And the origin of the disciples' strange belief in the resurrection. Let's examine each one briefly. Next slide. Joseph of Arimathea. Multiple early independent sources claim Joseph of Arimathea is said to have buried Jesus in his tomb. Paul quotes a very early Christian creed believed to be within 5 years of the crucifixion. Joseph's position makes him a more credible source. Remember, he was a member of the Sanhedrin, which were the enemies. Remember, it was the Jewish establishment that crucified Christ. So they wouldn't have made up a Jewish leader to be a hero in the Christian narratives. Next slide. We have an empty tomb. Again, multiple early independent sources for the empty tomb. 2, the tomb was discovered by women. Read the writings of Flavius Josephus on women's position in first century Judaism. Their testimony was not valid in court. If a woman was raped and the only man around that saw it was the guy who did it, and she came in and said, a man raped me, her testimony was thrown out because it was not valid. Why would they make women be the primary witnesses if they knew this, unless it actually happened? All competing stories all include an empty tomb. Whether it's the swoon theory, Jesus wasn't really dead, he just looked dead, and his disciples came, they paid off the Roman guards who wouldn't be paid off unless they died, and they stole the body by night and he went off to France and got married. Well, even if that was true, what do we still have at the end of the day? An empty tomb. What about the shallow grave? Yeah, he was put in the shallow grave and the dogs came and they ate his body. But what do you still have at the end of the day? An empty tomb. Every single competing story still has an empty tomb. Appearances. Next slide. Multiple people on different occasions in various circumstances claim to have seen Jesus alive after his crucifixion. Paul lists include some people by name. And then he goes on to say, some of the people, they're still alive. Go ask them. Check it out. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3b. The appearances were affirmed by multiple independent sources. Paul confirmed Peter's claim, as did Luke. John and Luke and Paul confirmed that the 12 saw him. And Matthew and John affirmed the appearance of the women, to the women. Final point. The true origin of the resurrection. This is just amazing. The disciples never believed Jesus would rise from the dead while he was alive. We can't dismiss that. From the time that on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. They didn't believe it. Their Messiah was defeated shamefully, crucified, cursed by God, cursed as everyone who hangs on a tree, naked, mocked, spit on, ridiculed, and betrayed. This was not the mindset of the Messiah in the Jewish mind. It just wasn't. Thirdly, the Jewish beliefs about the resurrection didn't even include individual resurrections. The Jewish theology did not presuppose anything but a final resurrection at the end of time. Belief in resurrection, the dead, is one of Rambam's 13 principles of faith. My time is stopped. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just about done. The second blessing of the Shemino Arasai prayer, which is recited 3 times daily, contains several references to resurrection. Perhaps the most objective evidence for the current lay of the land in the New Testament scholarship concerning these 4 facts, listen to this, will be a biographical survey of the relevant literature. Such a survey has, in fact, been conducted by Gary Habermas. In a survey of over 2,200 publications on the resurrection in English, French, and German since 1975, Habermas found that 75% of scholars surveyed accepted the historicity of the discovery of Jesus' empty tomb. Belief of the disciples' experience post-mortem appearances of Jesus is virtually universal. So in closing, the story of Jesus was not copied from pagan myths. It came from the Old Testament prophecies. The Bible does indeed claim that Jesus is the Son of God, which, as we saw, means he is God incarnate. And finally, the evidence of the resurrection proves he was who he said he was, the Son of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cotman-El. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the affirmative by Osiris Hotel. Osiris Hotel, you have 20 minutes. 20 minutes.
You don't mind if I sit down for a moment? Can you hear me well? The title of my presentation, of course, is Passion of the Christ or Passion of Osiris, the Congo origins of the Jesus myth. Part of this presentation is actually going to be on the slideshow, and part of it is actually going to be on the PDF. linguist, so I deal with linguistics, and there's a lot of linguistic data that wouldn't properly be formatted on the PowerPoint, so I'll be kind of switching back and forth. So some of my greatest influence, there's a lot of information to go through, so I'm just going to skip through some slides. Since we are at the Carver Library, I just wanted to acknowledge one of our African American ancestors, a true believer in Christ. He was a botanist, a scientist, an educator, and inventor. A lot of people know him for over 300 different inventions with the peanut. I invoke him precisely because although he was a very devout Christian man, he still practices Christianity in a very indigenous manner. So if you read the stories about Carter G. Woodson, he talks about that he talked to plants, and the plants told him what you could do with them. And this is how he came up with over the 300 plus inventions with the peanut and things of this nature. And we'll see why all of this is important if we get to it, if we have time. A lot of the information that I'm going to present is part of a book that I'm writing. It's called Ogum and the Meaning of, it's actually extended. It's Ogum, African Fire Philosophy and the Meaning of Kemet. And, but a lot of this topic is peripheral to the overall theme of that book. So I created another one just for this discussion that is titled Discussion. Because a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about, we won't have time to go over. So the data that I have is, a lot of this is original research. I want to have this available about that later. It's an ebook format. Just getting preliminary right now. I just want to say this is not an attack on anyone's faith. And primarily because, as according to the Bible, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, which implies anticipation of something, which means we're waiting for something to happen. I'm going to be dealing with history, so you don't have to worry about me not believing what you think is going to happen. We're going to examine the evidence of what is, the current present evidence that we have here. We asked a lot of debate. I found this comical, and I think it pertains here. So just to read it for folks. It says, you should not make fun of my religious beliefs. This is the Christian one on the left-hand side. That's intolerant and hateful. But you attack me all the time and claim that my lack of belief makes me evil and immoral. That's different. Calling you evil and immoral is a part of my religious beliefs, and thus is protected. And it goes to demonstrate a lot of what people who are not Christians have to deal with. And with me being an Africana studies scholar, it behooves me that there are people who will condemn certain other religious beliefs, and the Christian faith comes out of those same faith beliefs. They just change some things up. We'll see it in a minute. Now let's go. It's important that we deal with chronology. And I'm glad you brought up my opponent, Brother Tawfiq, a lot of the things that he brought up in this slide. Because most of it I won't even deal with, because we're dealing with stuff before Christ. So one of the things that, and if y'all don't know, me and Tawfiq, we actually debate all the time. So they'll be on Facebook though. So this is the first formal debate. So in one of our Facebook debates, we were debating about the Trinity. So he sends me to this site, which this link is, as you see, my laser. Okay. He sends me to this site of a scholar that he reveres and respects. And I was flipping through some stuff through the site, just checking it out. And I came across this. And he says, where did the pagans get this concept of three? Dealing with the Trinity concept again. Because all religions have a Trinity. Why not 2 or 4? Where did they get the idea of a God in heaven anyway? What about their belief in the Virgin and the Son? Where did that originate from? Romans 1:20-25 tells us that man from the beginning knew God, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Verse 25, they exchanged the truth for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator. When mankind fell into darkness of sin, they still retained some elements of the truth, but distorted its meaning, and it became lost. Okay. I'm glad that he said that. Let's just give him that for the sake of argument. God revealed himself in the form of a Trinity to all the nations. They didn't get it right. So he revealed himself to the Israelites, and they're the ones that chosen him to be on the story from there. There's going to be a problem when we talk about Jesus the Christ, because the chronology of it all is our whole calendar system starts at allegedly 0 when Christ was born. So if we find Christ anytime before 0 or 4 BC or 6 BC, depending upon scholarship, anytime before 4 BC that you find Jesus, we have a problem. Because you can't make that same argument that, God revealed Jesus, and he did when they had their this and all the other cultures beforehand. And then, of course, he had to come back again for the Israelites. So this is the reason why I brought up him. I deal with language. And the Hebrew language belongs to a language family called the Afro-Asiatic language family. Semitic languages, Semitic languages are, this is the so-called Linguistic over here, which you can't see. It is the only language family of the Afro-Asiatic language family that exists outside the proper continent of Africa. All the other languages that are related in that family are in Africa. This tells us something, that the people who originated this language are from Africa. The people who adopted the languages are people who came from other areas here. We deal with language because you can tell a lot by the people's language. If a family resemblance exists for the language, that means at one point they share the same culture. Languages kind of dialect off as people move off into different areas that don't have contact with each other. So for instance, like if you go to Louisiana, you'll probably hear somebody say the English word here, they'll say cheer. Go up to Dallas, they'll be like her. Or St. Louis, they'll be like her. Go up to Cali in certain parts, they'll be like jig. All those are the same words, but because of dialect, they pronounce it slightly different. The way that we can tell that it's the same word is we line up all the words together and we look at it and we measure the sound change. I wanted to talk about when all of the so-called Hebrews and other Africans actually lived in the same spot. And it's my argument and other scholars' argument that it's in the Sahara before it was the Sahara, before it was desert. What we call the Napster Pluvial period is when there was a lot of rain at this time. It was lush green all over the Sahara. After the Ice Age in Europe dried up, after the Ice Age and everything melted there, it took all the moisture out of Africa, out of North Africa, which of course is the reason for rains. So because it took all the moisture out of North Africa, that's why you see it all desert as far as the Sahara is concerned. This event pushed people further into the Nile Valley, further into Saudi Arabia, some parts going into Nigeria, Morocco, places like that. Some people further south into the Congo area. But in this particular time, we have all kinds of petroglyphs and things of that nature that shows that there were people living there. There was all kinds of animals, grass, all kinds of different things. But now, of course, it's a desert. So just more this Dr. Soikita, he's just going through all of that information. The Hebrew people are not necessarily who you see today. The Hebrew people are who you would call your Fulani people. We'll get into why that is. This particular map demonstrates the early migrations of these pastoralist people and why you have the word Fulani, the word Hebrew, because in Hebrew, the actual word for Hebrew is Hebrew, and plural is Hebraic. And there's different sound changes that you have to be aware of. P's turn into B's, B's turn into B's. You know, R's turn into L's all the time. And these are the kinds of things that you got to be mindful of when you're tracing the people in their movements. So remember, they're pastoralists, they're nomads, so they move everywhere, they're not settled folks. So, get to that later. Let's skip that. This is normally United Egypt. Let's skip that. Get into the linguistics area. I told you before that how we can tell that there's a family relationship between languages is that we compare terms and we look for what we call regular correspondences in the language. The languages tell us a lot about things. And when we're observing or when we're studying myths, what makes a myth is the characters in the myth have a unique name. And the people with the unique names interact with each other in a certain manner that tells and gives a narrative of the story. And we'll demonstrate that in a bit. So we're comparing, for instance, in Afro-Asiatic languages is Arabic and Hebrew, along with Akkadian, Phoenician, and some other languages. Most linguists don't put Yoruba. Yoruba in the Yoruba language, Yoruba people in Nigeria, they don't group that with Afro-Asiatic. But scholarship is changing that. There's a scholar by the name of Modupe Obiyoye, who since the early 60s have been demonstrating that the Yoruba language is related to Semitic languages. And so he does all these correspondences and things of this nature. Here's some of the data. If you see this Hebrew word kum, we see in Yoruba we have this word boom, which means to climb a hill. Kum means to rise up, stand up. Boom means to climb a hill or climb a ladder. In other words, to rise, to go high above something. Same thing in the Arabic language, we have the word kam, he rose. If you look here where there's Q and Q in the Arabic, it corresponds to the Yoruba G sound. Same thing with height, standing place. Ogun, he is tall. Ogun, it is erect. Ogun, yan, she is protruding at the breast. Her breasts have become breasts. In other words, it's an extension. You know, we're talking about height, extension, things of this nature. Ogun, war, in Arabic is makama. Ma is a prefix. The root word is the word kama. You see everywhere that we have Boomle, makama, to settle, to stay in place, Boomle in Europe. All these words here, in the pound, this is actually supposed to be moved down further. And the word kima, flower, means the power of medicine. They put medical herbs in the comment in the flower and things of this nature. Everywhere you see this Q, you see this G, and it's a, it is a correspondence. So now we get down here to the word Cain. When people say Cain, we talk about the Cain and Abel story. In Hebrew, his name is Cain. And Cain is a person who is supposed to be a farmer in the Hebrew story. The word Ogun is the god of iron. He's supposed to be the god of, the person of iron and farming as well. Ogun is a farmer and the god of iron. You see in Arabic the word Cain also means smith, a blacksmith, somebody who works iron. This should tell you something here, which that a lot of people miss in the whole Cain and Abel story. Because Abel is a shepherd. Abel is a shepherd, and the beef is, when we're talking about the beef between Cain and Abel, is that for instance, like the Egyptians, an abomination every shepherd was an abomination to the Egyptians. It was always a beef between the shepherds and the farmers. And the reason why is because shepherds require a lot of land for their cattle. And if you run up on somebody's farm and eat all their food, of course the people are going to be angry because they're starved to death. It's been an old beef. It's still going on in Africa today between the Fulani and the Ogun. Remember, Ogun is a farmer. Fulani is the root of the word for Hebrew. Ni is a suffix in the Fula language. They're also known as Pul or Boro. Same folks, still beefing in Nigeria to this day over the same thing. Cattle coming into the farms. The Egyptians first told this story, except it was it was set in Osiris. He represents the shepherd, and Osiris the farmer. All the details, of course, going as far as what is the eagle, or Bororo, Fula, and things of this nature. BRPLPRFL, which means to cross over, to trespass, to exceed, to bridge, across. It also means a whistle. The word Hebrew just basically means a nomad, somebody who doesn't settle anywhere. In other related terms, it's like a breeze. The breeze doesn't sit anywhere. Bridge, you cross over, things that much. See it. Just demonstrating that the word able is the same root as the word Hebrew. These are all the ethnic groups that have that root. Here with the FL, the Fula, the Afar in East Africa, the Afri, who Africa is named after. Africa from when the Romans took over in North Africa and Tunisia. Falasha, these are here in Saudi Arabia, the Gafar, Eber, Bar, all these in Arabia, Haru, ancient Egypt, Pulo, these are in Arabia as well. It's the same, okay. There's a lot of stuff I'm going to have to skip. Hold on. I was hoping that we can have time to go, and we thought we had 30 minutes. But I wanted to demonstrate, this is all the terms that you know in the Bible is for God. All the African languages have this word for God. People thinking that they serve a different God than the Africans don't know African languages. And this is the real point that I'm making. When you start studying African people and African languages, a lot of stuff is clear. Why? Because Afro-Asiatic is an African language. This word Yahweh, which everybody thinks is so sacred or whatnot, it just means spirit. And if we find in the phone language, Yahweh is spirit. Yahweh is spirit. And in the Goon language, Yahweh, God. All of these, of course, when everybody lived in the Sahara, they worship the same God. This is going into detail on how we demonstrate that Yahweh is the thunder God, the God is God. What I wanted to get into was to demonstrate that the word Yeshua and the word Ashil, for which Osiris is named, are the exact same name. And there's a way that we can demonstrate this linguistically. And I don't think I don't have that much time that we can get into. So hopefully in the rebuttals or something to this nature, I can sum it all up. And during y'all question, actually, I won't be able to go through it. I can demonstrate that the word Osiris and the word Osar are the exact same word. And this is how you would write Jesus in the ancient Egyptian language. Osar, I see it. You write, go back up. This is how you read Jesus' name. This is Yo, head. The Y sound, which can be a Y or U or O, or whatnot. You read Hebrew from right to left. So this is Yehovah Shoah. This is a reduced version of Yehovah Shoah. And this is Yeshua. What they did is they combined two names, of Yahweh or Yah, and Yeshua, which means to save. It can also mean wealth, abundance, things of that nature. And through an analysis, which we don't have time immediately to go through, we come to discover that this is the exact same meanings as what you find for Osiris. And what happens in African myths is that the name for the main character doesn't mean one name. There are conglomerates of different names based on the root system. The Hebrew language is built on a consonant root system. So what they'll do is they'll change the vowels and it'll be a different word, but the same root, but they'll all be related to each other. So they all spring from a central concept. And these are, I don't even know how much time. The time to move straight. But as soon as we, if y'all ask, we'll go through and we'll understand that there's an SR root to Yeshua and Osiris. And in the Hebrew language, the R turns into what we call the ayin. It's a glottal stop. And a glottal stop is a sound that you replace. It's a weaving consonant. So like how some people, you know that song, I got heaven right here on earth. Some people in the black community don't say heaven, you say heaven.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the cross-examination portion. You've heard both debaters make their points, or at least try to, in the time span. So as I'm going through cross debate, it's not going to be very much because I want to give you all extra time to formulate your questions for either debater. And I know I promised you 30 minutes, and it can be more if you want to slow it down. Okay. Let's start with Brother Tawfiq, Cotman-El, and then I'm going to ask Brother and Hotel some questions about his stance. Okay. Brother Cotman-El, in your presentation, you used the Bible as a reference a lot. Majority. So my question to you is this. Use the Bible as a source of Jesus' divinity and overall advocate. However, the Bible has over 16 different versions, and even today's scholars have all agreed that Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't write the books of the New Testament. So how exactly can you use that as a credible source?
Glad you asked. I came prepared for that. That's a very common one. I'd like to ask which scholars those are. I have over 30 scholars who are scholars in the field of New Testament studies, who are PhDs in the field, some of them several PhDs, who not only give credence to the fact that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the books that they said they wrote, but we have dates. And again, the consensus on the dates are extremely early, giving the manuscript support for other works that we already affirmed, such as Plato, Socrates, Antonius, Julius Caesar, someone like Alexander the Great. How do we know Alexander the Great existed? We just take it for granted. No one in here, I'm sure, has actually done the manuscript evidence to see what we have to prove, or someone like a Hannibal. We just assume. But if you actually do the research and look at what manuscript evidence we have, it is phenomenal, the faith that we give to historical figures, to dates, times, places, so forth and so on. But we do not do that with the New Testament. But like I said, the New Testament, I would like to know which scholars you're talking about, because the majority of the New Testament scholarship said otherwise.
I can give you two right now, and they, in their books, can give you many other. The first one would be the one that you saw earlier in the introduction. Dr. Barney Urban. He's a Princeton Seminary graduate, and I also have another book just a second. By gentleman Cotman-El, who wrote the New Testament. These are just two.
So again, we have two names, and I know you said that they were sworn. But again, what their reasons for saying that these writers did not write what books they wrote, I would have to see what evidence that they give. Again, the support for the New Testament writers that have actually written what they have written is just phenomenal. Aside from this extreme long list of names, we have, again, very early sources for the New Testament. Let's look at, for example, someone that we all assume existed. Socrates. You've heard Socrates before, right? Aristotle. Let's look at what we have for Aristotle. We have 49 fragments, 49 copies of what he wrote that were 1,400 years is the earliest copy that we have. The time he wrote it, 1,400 years later, somebody copied. That's the copy that's the evidence that we have. Not so with the New Testament. We're talking about 20 to 30 years at tops. And again, we have a very early creed in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that says it was done within 5 years. That just does not happen when you're dealing with ancient manuscripts. So again, I would stand on not just the names of these people, because we can do my scholar, we some your scholar all day. But when we look at the actual manuscript evidence, it is clear that not only did they write it, but that we have support that what they wrote is what we actually have today. Because we have different versions, does not have anything to do with the actual language and what is being translated. Because, like my brother is a linguist, even though there's a different language, it can be transcribed, it can be translated, and he can feel confident that what he has is what was written.
My second question, and then I'm going to ask questions to Sahara Hotel. There's another one of your references, the Apostle Paul. Now, the Apostle Paul never knew Christ himself. And has given multiple different stories of how he came into the gospel and what he did immediately after the gospel. Okay, why would or why should we believe him on the matter of Jesus' resurrection and divinity?
Excellent question. Again, I didn't say I wasn't using Paul as saying.
I think you used him as a reference as his divinity.
Yes. Well, what I said was that Paul was first introduced to the creed. I was using the creed as far as the early date, because in order for a creed to be passed around, it means that it had to have existed. He said, I received what was passed on to me. So Paul himself being one to say, yes, he said he did see the risen Christ in a vision. Now we can, deal with the reliability and, he saw the light, some people didn't hear. That's the fact is, he made a claim, and that's an early source. And then we have the actual source that he got it from, which was the creed that was passed around. And we're talking about 5 years, which just doesn't happen when it comes to first century ancient manuscripts. You just don't get better than that. That's actually really, really crazy. So I was using Paul as a source for being one who made the claim, who said that he was a witness to all these other people who said, yes, I saw him. He said, I have names. And in fact, the people who said that they saw him, they're still alive today. If I said, I just saw Tupac, he'd be like, okay, and my boys right here, they saw him too. You can go ask them. Well, you're alive, they're alive, you can go confirm that. One, he said 500 witnesses. That's a lot of people alive. It only takes one person in the court of law to witness a murder in order to sentence somebody. So.
I'm going to go ahead and attempt to cross-examine Open. I'm not sure if it's going to be kind of rough, because now I'm dealing with linguistics as opposed to the topic itself. I know you had a whole lot of plethora of things you had to say, you just didn't have the time. So I'm going to ask you some off questions that may or may not have been into your presentation, but are suitable for the examination nonetheless. All right. First of all, explain how you made the point about this beef. Is the terminology you use, beef between shepherds and farmers, Seth and Osiris. Okay. How is that negating or saying, somehow establishing that Jesus was not divine? Let me just mic.
Testing. It speaks to the whole motive of the Bible itself, because the writers of the Bible are basically anti-Hamitic. They group the gang of people in with, talk about Ham, Cush, Canaan, or whatnot. These are all your African groups. The Africans still recognize the divine in all things. If I had a chance, I would define what the word God is, so-called many gods, and things of that nature. The reason why the shepherds, again, the reason why the shepherds had an issue with the farmers and whatnot is because they were pushing them further and further out of the usable land. It's almost like how I guess the Europeans did with the Native Americans. You know, once they came over here, they went to war and pushed them into reservations, into the deserts and things of this nature. But all of the good land and whatnot, they kept for themselves and built cities around it where all the water and things and stuff was. This is what was happening. What we got to understand is what's going on at this time. It is that agricultural revolution. Up in Mesopotamia, up in the Sahara, up in the Nile Valley, people are abandoning the old way of life, which was the shepherd. I was going to get into Osiris also being a good shepherd. And you see one of his emblems is a shepherd's crook. This is one of the royal emblems in the Nile Valley. These folks used to be shepherds. That's why in the biblical text and in the Egyptian version of this story, Satan and Osiris, or Jesus, are brothers. In Cain and Abel, they are brothers. They're saying that all these groups, they belong to the same family, same Afro-Asiatic, they speak the same language family, Afro-Asiatic language family, the Hebrews and the ancient Egyptians. They all belong to the same, eternal source or whatever. What happened was, once people started doing agriculture, they didn't have to move nowhere. But in order to farm, you need large plots of land. Now, if you're taking all of the large land for people who have cattle, and they're roaming through or whatnot, it limits. It's a conflict of interest here. So now it's a conflict of occupation. And what you have is, of course, that's why I quoted in the beginning, how in the Bible, how they said to the ancient Egyptians, the shepherds were an abomination. Because the shepherds kept coming in eating up all their crops. If you have a whole population that is dependent on crops, and you have all of these different herders coming in and eating all of the food, then we have a problem, because the starvation is an issue of national security. So it's a political beef that they have. They also have some ideological beefs, and this is what culminated. You have one story, which most people don't read, is in the ancient Egyptian story. This is the one that came first. And then later comes the biblical story, and they tell their story. So for them coming out of Egypt and trying to claim an identity for themselves, they had to be anti-everybody else. They weren't just anti-Africans. They were all anti-civilizations, because they was a pastoral tradition. This is why in the biblical text, God allegedly doesn't want them to have a kingdom. Like, no, you stay to the tradition. But they kept on going. They like, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king. So, of course, in the story, they're like, okay, we finally did. So this is when they start the whole civilization process and abandoning the whole nomadic thing. But the initial part of the myth is just describing how the shepherds and the farmers or the iron workers or whatnot had to be. And this story is all over Africa. And like I said, it's a living, like I have an article in 2010, the Fulani, Able, the Oko Ogun, Kayan are beefing, killing each other in northern Nigeria for the exact same reason. And again, if we had time, I can go over and demonstrate this, but I hope I answered your question.
Okay, I'm just going to jump straight into the rebuttal. And we'll let Tawfiq Cotman-El go ahead and start.
Appreciate my fam Ed, giving me a hard time there. That's good stuff, good question. Actually, Bart Ehrman, he is a very wonderful scholar, and I encourage you to look into him. And I was just actually looking into him he actually is more of a liberal scholar in terms of the dating of the New Testament. He's going to place it within still about 50 to 70 years. That's still amazing regarding the actual major evidence that we have for other writings. So I encourage you to look into Erwin. He has a great debate with William Lane Craig on resurrection. You can watch that on YouTube. Okay, we have, all religions have a trinity. Prove it. Again, there's a misunderstanding on what a trinity is. In Kemetic mythology, you have a picture of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, the Holy Family. That's not a holy trinity. There's 3 different gods. You look into Krishna, and you'll have a picture of like a face, and it'll be 3 different faces, and they say, look, a trinity. That's not the Trinity. There is no picture to describe what the Trinity is. The Trinity is one God who manifests himself in 3 different persons, all simultaneously existing at the same time. That is not what the Kemites believed. They believe in pantheism, which is, there's like, almost like, and again, I'm using this word God, but almost like everything is God, everything is sacred, everything is holy. The sky, I mean, even, they're really deep. I mean, I got a great respect for these people. Even the primordial waters, before there was anything, that has its own nectar. The wisdom of words, I mean, truth, everything has its own nectar and it's all divine. They didn't have a Trinity. So I would say you got to prove that. He said that the calendar that we use starts with 0. First of all, that's a Roman invention. That's not a Christian invention. Because that we go off a Roman calendar does not prove anything. Again, he also said that Jesus just kind of popped up on year 0. But that's not the truth. You look in the Old Testament, you have something that's called Christophanies, or theophanies, where Jesus in the Old Testament is showing up. You got a situation where you got Abraham, right? And Sodom and Gomorrah is about to be destroyed. So who comes to see Abraham? 2 angels and 1 man who is called Jehovah. This is God in human flesh. You look in the book of Genesis, it says he heard the sound of God walking through the garden. God is a spirit. How does he walk through the garden? There's multiple examples in the Old Testament of Jesus showing up. And it is unarguably, this is God. Again, if you want some of that, hit me up afterwards. He gives an example of Louisiana, Dallas, and California, that there will be a similarity in speech. But listen, okay, I'm from Providence, Rhode Island, okay? We all sound alike. We say apartment. But on the same street where I say apartment and the dude next to me says apartment, that does not mean that we have the same thought. It doesn't mean we have the same culture. It doesn't mean we have the same life. Because there's similarity in speech does not equal unity or uniformity, right? Yeah, we should share the same language there. He had a date of a book. The date of the book was 1917. That's outdated archaeology. Since 1917, there have been tremendous finds. So we need an updated book. We all speak English. We all use the same names. Listen, just because, and this is something that really helped me out, words do not have universal meanings. For instance, I say the word God. The Hindu is going to think something different. The Mormon is going to say something different. You say, that's too general. I'm going to use a name. Let's use the name Jesus. The Jehovah's Witnesses, they say that Jesus was an archangel. The Mormons say that he was the brother of the devil. The Christians say that he is God incarnate. The Muslims say he's a prophet. We're using the same words. There could be somebody named Jesus in here. Just because there's a name that's the same does not mean it has the same meaning. Again, words take on the meaning of the context. I say the word ball. Well, what ball? You talking about basketball? You talking about a dance? You talking about we had a ball, like we had a good time? Just because you find all these words that have the same word, root, and all that, it does not mean it has the same meaning in the context. The shepherd passage. All that does is confirm the reliability of the Bible. That what they said is actually the case. again, the Bible does not have unique things. When in the Old Testament, where God was talking about holy, holy means sacred. My wife's name is Michelle. I'm sure there's other Michelles maybe in this room, but that name Michelle has a sacred meaning to me because every other Michelle is outside and there's one Michelle who's inside. So, yeah, you're going to find similarities. Like I talked about with his example. Look at ancient Egypt, look at Native Americans. We had many similarities, but that does not mean causality. In fact, that's a debating fallacy to say that because something came before, it had to cause. No, that's a fallacy. The thunder god. First of all, Yahweh was not known as a thunder god. He wasn't even known as a sky god. He was known as the god of the valley, the god of the mountain. You got to look into that. Yeshua and Osiris, same word. Again, Yeshua, Joshua. The name Jesus was actually Yeshua. Yeshua means Joshua, which was a very common name. Okay, let's just give it to him. Wasir and Jesus, that means that that's the same name. Oh, you know what the most common name in the first century was? Mary. You know how many Marys are in the Bible? It had to say Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary, because it's such a popular name. So that doesn't really mean anything. And again, all he's doing when he was talking about the differences, he said that the Hebrews believe this way, but the Kemites believe this way. All he's doing is proving my point more. There are differences. It's not the similarities that we need to be looking at, it's the differences. There will be surface similarities. That was all he was able to get to, so that was all the points. I do want to point out that he said, I'm not even going to deal with any of the points that I made, which in a debate, if you don't answer it, then you let it go. And if he lets it go, then he's saying I'm right. So I would say you really need to deal with some of the, he needs to deal with some of the things that I talked about.
For the purpose of me trying to be a man of my word, I'm let the hotel go ahead and do his rebuttal, but it's going to be really, really short. It's going to be really, really short. It's all good. And then we'll go right into the Q&A session, because I know y'all got some questions.
So much to deal with. Let's deal with the African perspective of what God is. It is impossible for Africans to be polytheists. From my research, Africans believe that God is the only thing that exists. There is no second anywhere. It is eternal, it is infinite. Nothing exists outside of infinity. It's amazing that Christians can have their cake and eat it too. Because we're supposed to understand that God is a trinity, a single entity manifesting as three different individuals. But Africans can't be one thing in existence manifesting as everything in existence. The difference is just numbers. It's the same principle, it's the same concept. So if you can't accept that God is the only thing in existence and that everything emanates from him or it or she or whatever, gender you want to call it, then, it's really just an issue of I just believe what I want to believe. It's a contradiction in statement. In terms of, there's so much, and I want to go to let me just say this first, and I'll just end with this. If it was just based on language, I would not have an argument. There's a name, of course, the name Jesus existed in the Old Testament before he was born. That means nothing. What we do is look for the characteristics and epithets of certain issues that happen between spiritual systems. I didn't deal, like in the book, I didn't deal with just Egypt. I deal with Congo and in Nigeria. 3 separate regions, 3 different time periods. Same story, same associations. This is how we can tell what what I was going into is that the root of Yeshua is the word Shua, which would be, if you were speaking ancient Egyptian language, it would have the SR The glottal stop would be the R in the ancient Egyptian language, and I go through all that detail. And this is what we do to demonstrate the competency that we can rely on related languages because they have similar meanings. There's no such thing as an exact meaning. It's a range of meaning. It's an associative field of meaning. And this is what we look for. So like when we look for the word Wisir, the W is a prefix, the Y is a prefix. You can say Shua or you can say Yeshua and without the Yeho in it. The word Yeshua means save, to rescue. Or you can just say Shua. The root is SR. We know that it's SR because when we cross-examine all of these different languages, that is the root. We look for the consonants. Vowels change like the wind, but the consonants are what's steady. So if we talk about Wisur, strong, strength, power here, it's the same here, except again, they dropped the R in certain words, but they kept it in the form of L. In certain things, you gotta understand what a glottal stop is. A glottal stop can be a weakened consonant of any consonant. It could be a T, it could be an S, or whatnot. And we find that a lot in the Hebrew language. So you see here, strength, strong, solid, hard, tough. They're all in the same range. Will, desire, still an SR root. Sha'al, S, remember that R is turned into L. Sha'al, desire, attain, need, request. In the Yoruba language, Yoruba is a lot older, so they have a lot of consonant erosion. So it'll just be one syllable. So with the need, R is also turned into to N, L, same thing. Shmila in the Shilua language, love, desire, freely, things of this nature. I go through all of this to demonstrate that the SR root is a sound comparison. So when we go into the, like for instance, the Yoruba language, and we look at the same roots, we're talking about saving, we're talking about to run, to flee away, to elope, to beg. These are all different versions of the same word, all dealing with running, escaping something. And then we go look into here further, we have Ibasile, which means to rescue. This SR root is reduced in Yoruba to Ola. They dropped the S in the front, which means to save, salvation, to cause salvation. In the Egyptian, we have the L to N from the form which is the word simi. Remember, R's, L's, and N's morph into each other. To rescue, to save. These are the same meanings that are in the Hebrew language. There's no different. So when we look into these things, as far as like in the Shilua language, Sheila, to leave, Sheila, Sula, to break free, to break ranks, to liberate, to save. Regardless of the word, it's the same word. It's the same thing in the Egyptian, it's the same thing in the Yoruba language, it's the same thing in the Hebrew. And this is how we can tell with these roots that, you know, when we talk about Asar being the Lord of living waters, this is an epithet before Jesus was ever born. It's all based on the SR roots. When we talk about him being a shepherd, it's all based on the SR roots. All of these terms mean these different things. And this is how we know that this is a myth. Because in myths, they converge all of these meanings based upon these consonants or roots. Just like how we did with Ogun and Kanye, we do the same thing with Yeshua, which would be Washil or Yashil in the Hebrew, in the ancient Egyptian language or the Shilua language. It's Asalu in the Yoruba language. It's the same word, same meaning, same root system. So besides the language, when we start getting into these epithets like living water, like him being a shepherd, we didn't even get into the whole Messiah thing. Wasar was the Messiah as well, him representing the bread of life. And not only because this is a picture of Wasar as far as him representing the ground and wheat, but because that isn't even enough. Plutarch discusses how when he went into Egypt, because remember the Egyptian civilization didn't fall to 394 AD. When Christ was born, that doesn't mean the Egyptian civilization failed. It was still going on strong in 394 AD. So when he goes in and witnesses, he talks about the priest bringing forth saving chest containing a small golden coffer into which they pour some potable water when a great shout arises from the company of joy that Osiris is found or resurrected. Then they knead some fertile soil with the water and fashion therefrom a crescent-shaped figure of him, which they cloth and adorn, and indicating that we regard his gods and the substance as earth and water. He goes on further to discuss, which I had on the other slide, of how they made an image of him and they ate the bread. This was required of all priests. So these aren't similarities, these are exactitudes. Just like how in the Bible you have Christ offering his body as a bread to be eaten. The same thing with Osiris. When we talk about the blood and the drink, Osiris is also associated with blood. The living water, the shepherdess, the whole cross symbol, the whole concept of being the Messiah. Everything down to the T that is associated with Jesus, we find in Osiris. We can back it up with Eshu in the Yoruba system of E5. And the same thing goes on in the Congo. So all of these places, pre-colonial, have these existence, these Christ, these Jesus figures. And the word Christ is in Greek. The real word in Hebrew is Mashiach. In the Siluba language, it is Mushumi, or Mushumi or Mushumi. It's the same root. Again, we go to the whole root system of what a Messiah is, what is to be anointed. People don't even know what it means to be anointed. It means to be covered in clay. This is when Africans used to start their initiations. And all the young boys and men that would start their initiations would be covered. They would be anointed, rubbed in different red or white paints. And after their initiation, after they were reborn and baptized or whatnot in the force of life, that's when they became Christ. The whole concept of Christ is nothing new in that. We make Christ all the time. We make Messiahs all the time. It was unique amongst the Hebrews because it wasn't a part of their culture. This is why Jesus stands out. We make Jesuses all the time now. As a matter of fact, the whole Jesus is an ethnic group in Africa, in several different places. But, y'all ask me specific questions, I'll answer them.
Now we're in the Q&A part. It's all about you on this one. Who would like to go first?
I would.
Ma'am.
First of all, I want to say thank you for coming out and giving your viewpoints on both sides. But my initial assessment of this whole thing is that there really wasn't a debate. Sorry, you really gave us a history lesson on the languages and the linguistics of it all. And then at the last minute, you tried to almost prove your point, which kind of threw me off. I'm not going to say that, threw me off, because if you had started in the beginning with what you ended with, we probably would have had a better assessment of what you was trying to relay. I just want to say that you should go to a college, give us a history lesson on it, because it was awesome. I really appreciated it, but the debate was not, it wasn't warranted. You didn't prove a point here with me. And so my question is, how do you, the rebuttal, how did you rebut what Tawfiq brought to the table? There was no rebuttal. How do you rebut that when you didn't have an opportunity to really lay out your lesson or your information to us?
To answer your question, the premise of my argument is this, that it's just exactly what I stated in the beginning, that if you find Jesus with all of the characteristics and everything before the Hebrews have a Jesus who was murdered, he was cut up into pieces, we're talking about Osiris and a whole bunch of different things that we weren't able to go to. If you find that prior to the existence of Jesus, you have a problem. It doesn't matter. Anything that he says after that doesn't matter. Because if we demonstrate in 3 different cultures before Jesus existed, that Jesus by name, and I dealt, that's why I had to deal with the linguistics. I know the community aren't linguists, so there's certain things that I have to explain first so I don't talk over your head. So you just don't think that I'm making stuff up as I'm talking, or whatnot. And so initially I thought we had 30 minutes. That's what we discussed beforehand. So a lot of things would have sped up after a certain point. But that's, as I said in the beginning, I already knew that I wasn't going to be able to deal with everything. That's why I wrote this particular, like within the last 2 weeks, I wrote a book specifically for this debate, because I already knew that trying to explain something to the average person in the community who don't deal with linguistics, who don't do comparative studies, is going to be an issue. And so stuff is just going to go over their head. So the issue that I was dealing with was, at this particular point, you have to explain how Jesus, with all of these particular characteristics in Ethiopia, Congo, Nigeria, and ancient Egypt, how do you explain him there before you find him amongst the Hebrews. Because it doesn't matter what you say about him after this particular time period, because we have him here. It's like the Wiz in the Wizard of Oz. You know, if you talk about that the Wiz is some original movie, you have a problem. You know, because we know from the copyright dates and everything and the stories from the 1800s, you know, before film was even done or whatnot. You know, in the Wiz, we have Dorothy, we have Yellow Brick Road, we have ruby red slippers. You know, even though Michael Jackson was moonwalking and everything, it was based upon the Wizard of Oz. And we have the exact same names in both different time periods and exact situations, even though they played the story differently. You know, it was culturally specific for African Americans, the Wiz versus the Wizard of Oz. And this is the same kind of issue that you deal with the biblical stuff. It's going to be slightly different because of it's different cultures. But the main premises are the exact same, and they use the exact same terminology. So it's an issue of probability. You know, how probable is it that 3 different areas in Africa have the same exact story prior to the Hebrews getting the story? And then we have the issue of proximity. We know for a fact, according to their story, that they were in Egypt. So we can't act like, you know, this was independent, like they weren't in proximity of these African people in the Nile Valley. So the language speaks against them, the history speaks against them. You know, the icons, we can prove everything in the icons, you know, as far as the associations and things are concerned. So this is the issue that I wish we would have had time to get into so I could demonstrate and show you, you know, the primary sources. I don't deal with people who say, well, resurrection. I deal with the primary sources. I go to the language. I go to the stone monuments, so you can see this type of thing. I take information from priests who are still living, who are still practicing their traditions on the continent. These are primary resources. So when we start dealing with the primary resources, there is no argument. Jesus, as the word Yeshua, is an African word, and it's attached to the one in Greek who we call Osiris, and who is the living water, the living bread, who was sacrificed, if you want to use that term. You know, the Christians have this thing where they want to monopolize all the words. So, you know, sacrifice, Trinity, resurrection, you know, all of these so-called Christian words. You know, all of these concepts. And I can illustrate in the SR that the word means resurrection. You know, that this linguistics is a very important, it's the second best thing to archaeology. You know, if you don't have money to roll, you know, and dig up the earth, study the languages. The languages will tell you everything that you need to know. Because the language is the oldest living witness to history.
Like she said, thank y'all for coming out. I saw it, right?
Correct.
All right. I might not have a question until you answer this question. I guess I know you deal with the language and linguistics and everything. I'm sorry. We're gonna do one question. It's my understanding that what you're saying is because of the language and the similarities between the story kind of multiplying over the years and over the cultures.
No, I'm saying the language is what we use to verify the concepts. Because in related languages, no matter how you pronounce it slightly different, they have the similar or the same meanings. So if something is obscure in the Hebrew language, I can go to the Egyptian or the Shiluba or the Yoruba language to look for the related term and to get a better understanding of what it means. And so that's why we use linguistics as a tool to back up all of our other findings.
And because of that, because of the similarities, Christianity, I guess, in your view, is not like Christ didn't exist, that all that wasn't real, all the stories about him were false. Is that what you're saying?
Based upon, see, that's the issue. If I'm finding the same story in Africa before Jesus existed, I can't logically say that this story is true because these same concepts would not exist in prior. That's why I'm like, you can't. If anybody tried to argue that the Wiz was the original, you know, you have a problem because we have the Wizard of Oz, the film that came decades before the Wiz, and we have the book. You know, so you have to explain away how the Wizard of Oz came to be before the Wiz.
So my question is, let's just take the Wiz for example. That's a crazy story. We know that there is no man made of straw. walking around here as a scarecrow. We know that's not true. We know there's no Tin Man that has, that is alive, has no heart, etc., etc. We understand that. So, let's say you got The Wiz, somebody made a book. Cool. They made the story off the chain. Then somebody followed it up with the movie, old girl, I don't remember her name, and Judy Garth. Then, some of us, we had our version with Michael Jackson, you know what I'm saying? Same story. Now, if we actually visibly then later, hundreds, maybe even thousands of years later, saw an actual scarecrow with straw, an actual Tin Man, actual girl with red slippers that was clicking them in, and we actually saw her disappear and go to some crazy land. We visibly, physically saw these things, hundreds of people, and there's so many different evidences that we can find. Just because the story and the movie came first, the evidence still shows that, dude, right? That dude he's a scarecrow. He is made of straw. So, even though we have those previous stories, language and all that stuff, we're looking at the scarecrow right now. So just because it came first doesn't disprove the evidence that shows, the Tin Man is standing right there. You know what I'm saying? So even though you're dealing with the past and how do you deal with the actual evidence of Christ being a historic figure, people seeing these visible things, the eyewitness accounts of the miracles, so on and so forth, how do you deal with that aside from, let's just say all these linguistic stuff is exactly the same. How do you deal with the evidence of history pertaining to Jesus, the person?
And after he answers, probably have time for 2 more questions.
I was just going to ask, where is the evidence, the hard evidence? He asked a good question.
Wait, before earlier, but I was going to let him answer that.
Okay, the issue, and actually this is a totally separate debate, is what is historical evidence and what is not. And we really don't have time to even get into that. But as far as hard evidence is concerned, if there was hard evidence
to him.
Huh?
My question was going to be to him.
But
where is
that's
that?
his question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Where is it?
He's not going to have evidence.
I know.
Because it doesn't exist. If it did exist, the argument would be dead. Nobody, it wouldn't be all these dozens of books, people refuting the whole Christian story. But we have their so-called evidence is people who lived after the time writing about the myth. And that's not evidence. There's no eyewitness account. The Bible was written in third person. Jesus said this, and Jesus did, and Matthew, and Paul, and Peter, and da. Nobody says that I witnessed this, and I did this. There's no I in any of the narratives. The gospel said that. No, Matthew does not say and I, and Matthew says and Matthew.
John said, I witnessed these things, and I'm relating to you. Luke said, I've seen them.
No, they say, John said, I've seen these things. If we have a time, we can go, saying, but every book is written in third person, just like Moses, and Moses died. How can Moses be the author of the first 5 books of the Bible? He write his own death.
Okay. First off, you said something that's not true. You said a couple things. You said there's no hard evidence, it just doesn't exist. That's just not true. We know that Tiberius Caesar existed, right? No one doubts that Tiberius Caesar existed.
Oh, let me just clarify myself. I believe Jesus existed as a historical reality.
That's what he's saying. There is no evidence that he existed as a historical reality. That's what he's saying.
But it's the Son of God thing I have an issue with.
And that's fair. And in the time that we have after, I'd love to talk to you about that. But in terms of he's saying that Jesus did not exist as a historical person, that's just not true. Yeah, that's just not true. We know that Tiberius Caesar existed. However, we only have 10 authors who wrote about him 150 years after he existed. You want to know about Jesus? Check this out. We have 9 traditional New Testament authors, 20 early Christian writers, 4 heretical writings, and 9 secular sources, 150 years from the time. That's a conglomerate. We have more evidence that Jesus existed than Caesar did. On top of it.
That's the question. What is it?
It's writings. We have manuscripts.
No, we don't have no manuscripts. I would love to see these manuscripts.
Okay,
I've been researching this for 10 years and have not seen any manuscripts.
It's
very time from anybody who lived during the time of Jesus. I would love to mail it to you. We can come back. I will put it on my
After
website.
question, at the same time, I'm gonna show you what I got.
I did my own research. I'm still trying to see where Paul is buried. Where Mark is buried. Okay, but I'll leave
Okay, 270 cultures around the world that have nothing to do with each other all have a similar version of Noah's flood. So does that disprove the flood, or does that prove that this world actually experienced a flood? My main question is this: if I'm worshiping a false god, if I'm worshiping a myth, how do you explain me praying to Jesus and having my sickness healed? How do you explain me praying to Jesus and having lust flee from my body and not desiring flesh in a way that is contrary to Scripture? How do you explain that if I'm worshiping something that doesn't exist?
Okay, I'm gonna relay a story. And two people in here are witnesses to this story. Me and Tawfiq, my man Iran in the back. Me and Tawfiq was in a rap group called Tribe of Judas. Used to practice at Tawfiq's house. It was me, Tawfiq, and Iran, maybe brother in the back as well. Iran locked his keys in the car. We sat there for like 30, 45 minutes trying to pick and get the lock out. Tawfiq's mother was here, sitting in the 1, 2, 3, third row. Tawfiq's like, we locked the keys in the car. We can't leave. This is the most devout woman I know, period, hands down. I believe if she asked for it, God gonna give it to her. She got us all together. Put our hands, we held hands, and we prayed that the door would open. After feeling rejuvenated or whatnot, Iran goes to unlock his door. First try. We like, dang. I can't argue against that. The problem is, I've witnessed the same type of event for people praying to Allah, people praying to Olodumare, people praying to Onkunkuluku, and any other type of whatever name the God is. From an African perspective, we understand this, that the universe understands sincerity. It doesn't matter what you call it. God is bigger than whatever name you think it is. The word God itself just means distance. It means height. It means above. It means sky. It's an African word. And I wish I had time to go through that too. It means an elder. It means an ancestor. This is my God. She is my God. Because the word God means elder. This is my elder. She is my elder. The problem is in this discussion that people don't know African cultures and they don't know African languages. They don't know African concepts, but they want to make value judgments upon African cultures and things that they have not studied. And what amazes me is that Christianity is an African religion. It comes out of Africa. The language is African. The concepts are African. The whole concept of sacrifice, the whole concept of circumcision, the whole priesthood of Judas class, all of that we find in Africa. There's a whole school in Africa that makes messiahs, which I wish we could have gotten into. The problem is that Christians try to capitalize God. Like we own everything that could be righteous and understanding about God. So how do you answer that same question to the same folks who had their prayers answered, praying to Olodumare, to Eshu, to Washu, to Osiris, to Allah, to Oluwa, to Vudum, to Yahweh, to Yahweh? What rebuttal do you have for those same people who are getting their bills paid, who are getting their needs met, getting the job that they want, praying to the God that they know? And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to, have this particular discussion. A lot of these concepts, these people you thinking are different gods are the same name, same God. But because of the beef between them, they try to separate themselves. We're talking about the Hebrews. And so now they try to make everything exclusive. Now the whole concept of a Messiah is exclusive. Only Jesus could be a Messiah. Now he's the last one. It's like people in the Nation of Islam. Elijah Muhammad, the last prophet. So what's the whole point of you living? If he's the last, there's nothing for you to accomplish. There's nothing for you to achieve and expand and do. We just live like robots. So just, ain't that what Christ came to do? Get rid of the robots? The people who were just following the law? You don't think about these things. You know, it's bigger than Christianity. It's not even, you know, Africa has Christians that were before Christ. And I wish we could have gotten to it dealing with that root mind God and the Muslim. So go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question, set up a question. This is a scholarly debate, and you seem to be have a very good understanding of the linguistics, as far as cultures and stuff like that, and regional different things. But as far as debating the actual topic that was at hand, your reasoning doesn't seem very scholarly. Like for instance, when you said that there's been a bunch of different. If Jesus Christ really did exist, then why were there so many books about it? Well, we know that the moon landing happened, but there's a bunch of different books and many different research that have been done to say that. I think they even did a study said I think 25% of people didn't believe that it actually really did occur. So that's just not good logic, scholarly speaking. Now, whether it's true or not, I'm not going to debate you on. I'm just saying that's not good logic. And then even when you mentioned about the Trinity, being the same thing as you mentioned pantheism. Well, you have two different definitions we're using. You have a being, which is what something is, and you have a person, which is who they are. Like if Osiris and Horus and all these different people are claiming Trinity, that would mean that they're the same being, but different persons. That would be what the definition of the Trinity is. These are separate persons with separate beings. One of them resurrected another one back to life and different things of that nature. When Jesus said, I'll resurrect myself back to life. Which those two different languages that are being used. And so my question for you is in light of what they call parallel dimension, which all these different parallels are saying it's the same story over and over again. You realize that, how do you feel about, what's your answer to this? That has been brought up many different times and been disproven on so many different levels because the logic that the people use to do them aren't scholarly.
I'm not sure you understand what the nature of scholarship is. For us to debate scholarship, we have to debate the evidence that something exists. This is why I took the approach. Because it brings the question of existence into question of Jesus. Whether he's the Son of God is irrelevant. He could be the fire God. If you believe that he is the fire God or the water God or whatnot, it's irrelevant. Because you have to demonstrate that he existed. So what I'm saying is that how can you say exclusively that this person was born in this time and had all of these adventures, but we find the same person, the same entity, having the same adventures or whatnot in all these other different cultures prior to the Hebrews. The Hebrews are a young people. There is no Hebrews until they leave Egypt.
Can I ask you a question real quick? I played an audio with you that the Native Americans and the Africans have all these similarities. Showed you the picture of it.
There's a difference between similarities.
It's the exact same thing.
No. We're talking about in conjunction. What I was going to do was ask everybody, when you think of Jesus, what are all the titles that you think of that are associated with Jesus? And what I can do in my presentation is go down Osiris and go down Eshu and find every exact epithet for Jesus. The question then becomes, how does Eshu and Osiris, who existed before Jesus, have the exact same epithets and exact same characteristics and go through the exact same history in some different form or manner? It's not an issue of similarity at this point. The question is, how many coincidences are allowed before it's no longer a coincidence? That's the question.
I'm so sorry. We have another group about to come in. You're ready to come in at 4 o'clock, so we don't have to wrap up. But I hope you all enjoyed the scholarly debate. There are more questions. I know if you just ask the debate, we'll be around outside in the lobby.
I'll be outside. I got my board.
Yeah.
I would like to just make a statement, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
I know we're rushed for time, and I know there are a lot of things still on the floor, questions unanswered, but I just want to thank God for these wonderful young men that would have the nerve to come in here and do what they have done. And regardless of what the outcomes and the answers may be, God can use anything. And for me, the issue is the miracles prove the Jesus. You know, in spite of anything else, it's the miracles. And his sovereignty in responding to the statement you made about the different gods and the different names. God is God, and he can use whatever he wants. And I believe that there's a lot to be said for what we strongly believe. God uses them. So I thank God, because these young men, y'all could have been out doing a whole lot of other kinds of things.
Thank you very much. Once again, we take donations. Love you right back there. The guy from White. Whatever you got a small